Good evening and welcome to the ShadowTrader Video Weekly for Sunday, October 7th, 2012. A relatively quiet week, just kind of a grind upwards. This is a weekly, it's actually a daily chart here of the Dow. The first thing I wanted to point out is that the Dow touched a multi-year high here. I think I mentioned this in a prior video saying, look out for the Dow to come to this high, and it did, and we then backed off a little bit. Friday was kind of a mixed day in the markets with the Dow up, the S&P down, and the NASDAQ down a bit more. And it seemed to me that on towards the end of the week that's really what caused the market just to back off here. Notice that the Dow on Friday went right up into that area, made the market back off. In more important matters, and I say more important matters because the S&P is really the important benchmark that we always look at. I was looking at this week, right? Talked about the fact that that there was a downtrend line of a pullback here broken. So this was Thursday, this was Friday, we moved up there. So it's really, it doesn't tell us all that much other than, the market's really strong here. What I'm noting here is the fact that we have now come one time here on a pullback, which was very mild, without coming to the trend line, right? This is the dominant channel in the S&P, and now it's a second time. All right, but at the same time, we're not very overextended. We're just riding the 20 MA. Remember in past videos I told you that you will always get a pullback when you are about 30 to 40 points away from the 20 MA. And that's not the case. You're just kind of moseying along. So honestly, my assessment for next week is just kind of neutral here, and you'll see when I get into the strategies that I'm going to talk about. I have a couple of trades here that are really they're not stock related. I've got some commodities and some other stuff to talk about. It's because I just don't really think the market is going to do too much. We're really basically dead on in the middle of the channel. If you were to draw some sort of a middle line here, you can see that we're basically right there. So not a heck of a lot going on in the S&P. I think it's pretty much about a 50-50 shot that we at this point move to the low end of the channel here, or even move up into the high end of the channel here. All right, let's talk about the profile. I am noting a couple of interesting things going on there. I am carrying forward information of a couple of poor lows we had this past week. Let me see if I can get that chart up for you. Oh, it's actually hiding it under here. Sorry about that. I'll put that down. Okay, so here's our profile, and I'm really just going to point out three things, three pieces of information that I'm carrying forward for the coming week. We did have a couple of poor lows, which are right in here, and I want to show you guys those. Remember, poor lows have a stronger chance of being traded through once they stack up, meaning when you get more than one of them, and you have two poor lows here. Remember, poor low is where you don't have excess like this at the end of indicating the end of the auction. This is how the auction should always end, in excess. If it doesn't, it's called a poor or unsecured low. When these poor lows stack up, if price was to get really bearish and trade all the way down through here, the chances of us holding the 1427 now are much, much lower. So that's a little bit further out there in terms of where we are. It's a little further on down the road. I don't really, I don't foresee that happening right away in the next couple of days, but there's possibility in the coming week that it does happen. So I did want to point that out, that if we have a bearish week, that you should be watching this area here where these poor lows are, and price could easily trade down through them. I'm also noting that price closed relatively low in relation to value on Friday, and we do have sort of what is known as the 45-degree line. Not really a perfect 45-degree line. 45-degree line is usually when you have a much more prominent POC like this, but it is somewhat indicative of traders kind of getting ahead of themselves to the downside. We just had a little bit of pressure to the downside, but the value stayed relatively high. I am kind of noting that we did break out over a balanced area and then trade back into it. I'll show you that in a second here. Let me get a drawing tool here if I can. See this area here, if I could. Let me see here. I'm sorry. This is a balance area here. And notice price looked above it and then was not able to close above it. So I am noting that. This is also a balance area here, relatively larger one. Balance is essentially where you have overlapping value, so you can see the value areas are just the black bracketed areas where 70% of the volume is going off, and it's just overlapping. All right. So we have two poor lows. Value stayed high on Friday. Price closed a little bit lower, and we have these two balance areas. So be aware of this. This past week I was noting that we have this 1457 area here in the ES where there were multiple POCs. There were actually 3 of them there in a row. You can see it here, and then you can see it here, and you can see it here. So it'll be interesting to see if we have weakness in the coming week, if we see price acceptance underneath that 1457 area. I know it's definitely key because notice on Thursday when we broke out up above the balance, we really spent a lot of time there. You have a very, very prominent point of control right in that same area, 1455-ish, 1457. So this is an area that I'm going to be watching in the coming week. All right. Very, very slow economic calendar, which should be noted. I'm going to just spend a second touching upon that. When I say slow economic calendar, I mean in the coming week. And this is all really tying in with what we should be thinking about next week, that I think there's probably not going to be too many fireworks. Obviously, I could be wrong. I have no idea really what the week will bring, but this is how I set up my week in advance. I think about what the profile, where the profile is, where we look technically, and also what's going on the economic calendar. And you can see that it's really empty this week, except for the jobless claims on Thursday and the PPI on Friday. That's really the only red star events. This international trade I don't put too much stock in, but notice that you're really empty on Tuesday and Wednesday, and more importantly, Monday is Columbus Day, which means that the bond markets are closed and banks will be closed. However, stocks will be open. So that is also probably going to be adding to some sideways chop. All right, let's talk about some trade ideas for next week. Given that things are possibly not going to be too exciting on the equities front, I have been looking at some other trades that I'm going to be focusing on in the coming weeks. First one is crude oil, and it's really simple Fibonacci pullback to the 61.8. I believe that 61.8 pullbacks are the strongest of the fib numbers. The fib numbers really are that you need to be paying attention to are really these three here: the 38.2, the 50, and the 61.8. I believe the 61.8 is the most powerful. They call it the golden ratio. So when I see commodities setting up on a pullback to the 61.8, I am interested in crude. That's going to be at 86.12, as you can see. So I'm going to be looking for that for a bounce trade in the crude futures there. I don't know if this could be a turnaround point to send crude back up to 100. To be honest with you, I think not. I'm really more thinking crude back down after that, but it's a trade, so the trade may last, an hour, it may last a day, a couple days, but I do think there's going to be a bounce there. So I'm looking at the 86.12 area in crude. All right, next thing I'm looking at is actually in Apple. Last week, I believe in the video, I said that there was a head and shoulders pattern forming in Apple. It does seem that it has played out, so we could see some further weakness in Apple here. And I think there's going to be further weakness, but not too much further weakness. You can see that I've drawn a trend line in here, which is bringing Apple right to around the 620-ish area. And my play in Apple, which I started initiating on Friday, is to do a ratio spread 1/2, where I bought the 625 puts on the weeklies. So this is going to expire at the end of next week, and I sold 2 times as many of the 615. So I essentially have like a 10 wide spread there, 1/2, and I was able to put that on for a 60-cent credit. So my thought process is that Apple will be weak next week, but it will not be devastatingly weak. It will go down slow, and it will go down to this trend line area. And if so, if it's there by the end of the week, then my spread will be worth a lot more, and what was put on for a credit will also be sold for a larger credit. So that's my play in Apple there. 1/2, 625, 615. Okay. Let's look at soybeans, believe it or not. It's not a market that I look at that often, but if you look at the /ZS, I think there's going to be a long play here to be had in soybeans. And this one I think could follow through for a while. I think there could be more upside in the beans. Basically, I just took a simple 61.8 retracement from the low of the pullback here, which is really the start of the last move up in soybeans. And I'm also tying that together with the fact that you've got a trend line coming all the way back from this low, perfect touch to the pullback, and look where it brings us, right here. And there's just huge confluence in that same area at the 61.8 is at 14.97. And probably as next week goes on, the trend line is going to meet it right at the same spot. All right. Those of you that have never traded soybeans before, they're actually really interesting. The tick value is the same as the ES. So think about that for a second. The tick value, watch, I'll show you, is $12.50. Oops, I don't want big buttons. I want dashboard. Look at this. I'll set that to 1 so it's easier to understand. Tick value is $12.50 for each quarter. That's the same exact thing on the ES. However, notice how much the beans are moving lately. They're extremely volatile. They're a lot more volatile than the ES. The moves have been really large. I mean, you can see here you have just in one day on this bar moving from 1600 down to a low of 1558. Let's call that 1560. That's a 40-point move in one day on an instrument that has same notional value as ES. So you're talking $50 a point per contract. So it's interesting. So possible futures play here at the 1500 support level in the soybeans. I'm going to be watching for that this coming week. All right, last trade I have for you guys is one that is actually in the free trade idea of the week this week. Those of you that are viewing the video through the weekend update, as I'm sure you all are, take a gander at VNO, Vornado Realty Trust. I started legging into this via a tweet that I sent out on Friday afternoon at I think like 79.80 or something, 79.90 I think. Look at how strong this support is, and the stock has just really been cycling between this 80 and 85 area for quite some time now. And with a 3.5% dividend, and it's a REIT, I really think that it holds up here. I think it holds this support and continues to cycle in this area. So I'm already long a little bit. I'm going to be getting long a little bit more. Anywhere on weakness, I would say, right down into here, and then probably giving it a decent size like $1.50 to $2 stop there, just so I don't get stopped out. And I'm looking for a move first to the middle of the range, which would be 82.50 for a 50% retracement, and then possibly even all the way back up to the highs at 85. All right, and again, that's the free trade idea of the week. Right in the weekend update that you're looking at right now, just hit the table of contents in the upper left. All right, that's all I have for this week. On behalf of myself and the entire ShadowTrader team here in beautiful Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, I wish you good trading and good night. And also, as a reminder, I will be guest hosting for Brad on the Squawk Box on Monday all day long. So join me there live on Thinkorswim on the Squawk Box in the ShadowTrader room. All right, take care.